Find it. Tehillim. Where's the Tehillim? Tehillim. The Tehillim.
Okay. Looks like we're up on YouTube. 1 second. There we go. Turn that off. That's on. Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna mute everybody. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like. And I'm going, where is that? Okay, looks like we're all set. If you notice someone coming on that I didn't accept, you'll let me know, yeah? Okay, chapter 15, Kapitel Tezvav. Once we finish this chapter, we are 10% through Tehillim. It gave me tremendous excitement when I realized that. 10% through Tehillim. That's a sizable accomplishment. 15. This is the 15th class, chapter 15, Kapitel Tezvav, and it's a great, great chapter. You know, we had a lot to say last week with the chapter last week, with the Kapitel last week, but this week it's like almost on the flip side from a positive perspective. Last week we talked about Novel, about the fact that there's so many people who say there's no God, etc., etc. But then this week we come to talk about the righteous. So let's go right into it. We'll read it once, translate it, and then come for a second round with more explanation. So Mizmer LeDavid, a psalm for David. Hashem, mi yogur ba'alecha. Hashem, who's going to live in your tent? Mi yishkoin, who will dwell b'har kodechecha, on the mountain, your holy mountain. So who's going to do that? Who's going to be the lucky one that's going to dwell in Hashem's oil, in Hashem's tent, or on the holy mountain? Who is it going to be? Haylich tamim, ufayel tzedek. Someone that walks, that goes like a tamim, that he goes innocently. Payel tzedek, his actions are tzedek, are righteous, are correct, are just. V'doiver emes bilvavai, and he speaks truth in his heart, or maybe should we say, even in his heart. Lo yiragal al lushaynai. First of all, he doesn't gossip. There's no gossip on his tongue. Lo yasal re'eyu ra'a. He doesn't do any bad. There's no negativity, no bad things that he does to his friends. V'cherpa, and disgrace. Lo ynasa al kreivai. He doesn't bring onto his relatives, or his relatives don't bring onto him. We'll talk about that on the second pass. Pasuk Dalid. Nivze be'enov nimas. Those who are despicable to Hashem are also despicable, are abhorrent to him. Ves yirei Hashem yechabed, and those who have yiras Hashem, those who fear God, who have awe of Hashem, yechabed, he honors. Nishba lahara v'lo yomir. Even if he makes a promise, and this promise, or this, he swears something that will be maybe something not so positive towards him, meaning he swears off something for himself, some positive thing for himself. Lo yomir, he won't go against his word. When he gives his word, he won't go against it. Kasboi lo ynasan beneshech, his money, his wealth, his things, like Nasan, he doesn't give it, like when he gives out a loan, he doesn't give it with neshech, with ribis, he doesn't charge interest. V'sheichad al naki lo ilokach, and he also doesn't take bribes against the innocent. Oisei finishes off this kapitel. Someone who does these things, loi yimait la'olam, will never falter. So this is, in a nutshell, our kapitel, our chapter, Tehillim, chapter 15. And now let's go through it again. Before we go through it again, a little small introduction that I'd like to give. As I mentioned before, this is a continuation from the previous chapter. The previous chapter talks about the novel, that the people go against Hashem. And what does it say in that chapter? That Hashem finds himself b'der in the generation of tzaddikim, right? Ki elikim b'der tzaddik, we said last week. That Hashem finds himself in the generation of the righteous. So what's the generation of the righteous? Comes this chapter to talk about the virtues, the uniquenesses of the righteous. A fully righteous person over here is not just someone that does one right thing. So a fully righteous person is someone that's complete in his midas and in his vaisim taivim and in his emunah, in his belief and faith in Hashem, in his actions, and in his character traits. So that is a full, well-rounded, righteous person that we're talking about here in this kapitel. But hold your horses, because if we're going to talk about all the different character traits and say that that's what a tzaddik is, hold it, because there's a fascinating story in the Medrash that I'm going to bring up at the end. Amazing, beautiful story between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Gamliel looks at this kapitel and Rabbi Gamliel cries. Rabbi Akiva looks at this kapitel and he laughs. He's so happy. Why? Wait, you're going to hear the story at the end of the kapitel. Beautiful, beautiful ending to bring out all the different details here in this kapitel. So at the end, also another thing to note that it's mentioned in Yalkut Memlei is that at the end of the previous chapter, what did we say? That David HaMelech prays to Hashem, Mi'itain, please Hashem, give us the salvation. Where's the salvation going to come? It's going to come from Tzion. It's going to come from Yerushalayim, come from Jerusalem, which seemingly means talking about the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and that's the salvation. Comes here at this kapitel and is talking about the idea of a righteous person, the idea of a tzaddik, the level of a tzaddik. And interestingly enough, our sages say he doesn't say a word about anything that involves the temple. To be a righteous person, you could be a righteous person even in Galus, even in exile. To be a righteous person, you don't have to be bringing karbanis. That's what sages say, that you might think to be a righteous person, you need to be able to bring karbanis, bring sacrifices. You need to be able to bring karbanis, and you need to be able to do certain mitzvahs that we can't do unless we are in the land of Israel. It's called mitzvahs hatluyes baretz, the mitzvahs that are special, that belong only to Eretz Yisrael, and we can't do that if we're not in Eretz Yisrael. But the psukim here does not mention any of it. On the contrary, the psukim over here mention 11 virtues. If you count them one by one, there's 11 virtues in this chapter, and different commentaries explain it different ways. According to some, it represents all 613 mitzvahs, and that with 11, we can get to 613 because each one represents a pack of mitzvahs, a chunk of the 613, and together, all these 11 virtues, you get to 613. But there was another commentary which is special for this kapitel that says that it's not that the 11 represent 613, that if you follow in these 11 ways, meaning you're a mensch, you do things properly, you have proper midas taivos, you have proper faith in Hashem, you do the right thing, righteous things in your actions, and that you have good midas, that you have good character traits, and following these 11 things, so then the rest is easy. Doing 613 mitzvahs is easy. That's the way other commentaries explain it. Not that they represent 613, but by being such a person, you'll be able to do the other 613. It makes it easier to do a mitzvah. When you're such a person, it makes it easier to do such a mitzvah. And you're going to do 613 mitzvahs, as we're going to see as we go through each one of them. Now, let's go verse by verse. Mizmar LeDavid, a psalm for David. So Hashem miyoger ba'alacha. Who's worthy? What's the pasuk saying? Who is worthy to be in Hashem's, around Hashem? Who's the worthy one? So it's interesting because it mentions two things. Who's worthy to live in your tent, and who's worthy to dwell on your holy mountain. So what's the difference between the tent and the holy mountain? So tent is referring to Olam Hazeh, to our world. In our world, who's worthy to live with Hashem day in, day out. Who's worthy? Oh, we're going to get into it. These people who follow these things, those are the people that are worthy. And if you are with Hashem, miyoger ba'alecha, if you live with Hashem with these things, so then yishkoin, ultimately you will live, you will dwell bahar kodshecha, which is olam haba, which is the world to come. And if you look at the Hebrew, mi yishkoin is in the future tense. It's talking about something that will be in the future. It's talking about olam haba, talking about the world to come. If we live a proper life in this world, so then we will dwell with Hashem in the world to come. And Radak also says something similar. It's talking about who's going to live a proper life, who's going to live a menschliche life, and those people, is neshama after 120, will go to the proper place. So who are these people? Who's the person that's going to dwell with Hashem? So the pasuk continues, pasuk number 2. We continue. Hoilich tamim. So this pasuk mentions 3 things: someone that is a tamim, someone that is payil tzedek, and someone that is doiver emes bilvavai. So tamim, the simple translation that he says over here, hoilich tamim, he walks innocently. That's the simple translation. The next is payil tzedek. Payil tzedek means that he acts justly. It's talking about action, that he does things, and he does it tzedek, with righteousness. He does it just, he does it properly. And Doiver Emes Bilvavei says truths in his heart. So that's words. So there's Hailech, there's about walking, there's about action, there's about words, there's about saying things. So those are the 3 things that we're talking about over here. The way the Medrash explains it is that the first thing is that he goes with innocence. He goes with innocence in his beliefs. He goes with innocence in his opinions. Doesn't have to be so strong. I think this way, I think that way. No, I think what Hashem wants. Hashem wants me to be here, I'll be here. Hashem wants me to do something else, I'll do something else. That's Hailech Tamim, simplicity, innocence. It's not about what I want, how I want. It's what Hashem wants. And that's the first category. Payil Tzedek, the person who does actions but justly, is that you don't do a half a job. Payil, he goes and he does the action. Tzedek, he does it, the whole action, in total fullness. And then when he says Doiver Emes Bilvavai, is the idea that he says truth in his heart, is that it shouldn't be Echad Bepev, Echad Belev. The big problem that some people, they say the right things, but deep down inside they don't feel that way. And that's not what it's talking about over here. Doiver Emes Bilvava is someone that says truth even in his heart, that the truth that's coming out of his mouth and the truth that's in his heart, they're one and the same. He doesn't have one thing that he says and another thing the way he feels. He feels and he talks Emes, only the truth. And that is this idea. The truth is that it really represents the opposite of the previous chapter, that Amar Naval Beliboy Ein Elikim, that the novel, he says in his heart, Ein Elikim. He tells you what you want to hear, but in his heart he says there's no God, right? So this idea that David Emes Bilvavai, that a righteous person who's going to dwell with Hashem, who's going to be in Hashem's tent, that is someone who David Emes Bilvavai, that in his heart and in his speech, he says the same thing, he says the truth. There's other commentaries that comment on this pasuk, and they say that Hoilich Tamim, someone that goes Tamim, someone that goes innocently or simple, is someone who feels that he's not missing anything. Hoilich Tamim, everything is simple, everything is easy. I'm not missing anything. I have what I need. I have what I want. I'm good. Everything, Hashem gave me what I need. And then not only does he do what Hashem wants, Payil Tzedek, he's also Payil on others that they should do Tzedek. He inspires others that they should do righteousness. Not only that he does righteousness, that's a given for a good person, that he does good things, he does righteous things, he does just things, he does the right thing. That's a given for a good person. Here we're talking about the next step, that not only he does good, he also inspires others to do tzedek, to do righteousness, to do the right thing. And Doiver emes bilvavai, I like this pshat over here, that he says, what does it mean to say emes, to say truths in your heart? Sometimes we think, I gotta say this, I gotta get it out. I'm sitting with somebody, or I'm sitting with a bunch of people, and I have something to say, and I gotta say it. And you think about it, should I say it, should I not say it? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it emes, right? Is it true? And if it's not true, obviously I'm not gonna say it. But this is true. But before I say it, Doiver emes bilvavai, first say it in your heart. First think about it. Think, just because it's true, should I say it? Does it need to be said? Is it going to help anybody if I said it? Is it the right thing to do to say it? So even though Doiver emes, even though he's saying the truth, bilvavai, first he thinks about it, he meditates about it, he mulls it over. Should I say it or should I not say it? First say it in your heart, and if it feels right to say it, then go ahead and say it. But think about it before you say anything. And that's Doiver emes bilvavai. The righteous person, this person that's going to get his place, it's going to be together with Hashem. Miyager ba'alecha is going to live and dwell with Hashem. This is a person who thinks and doesn't just say, oh, it's true, so what's the problem? Of course I could say it. It's the truth. No. Say it first to yourself, see if it goes well, if it goes over well, and if it goes over well, then say it. Otherwise, keep it to yourself. You don't necessarily have to share. It could have a negative, even though it's true, it could have a negative effect on a friend. It could have not the intended effect.
It could be not nice. It could be hurtful.
Right. That's also the other extreme, that even though it's true, it could be hurtful. But even if it's something that's out there, it's nice, it's a good thing. But you can embarrass a friend, meaning you could say, Yankel is such a nice guy. You know what he did for me? He helped me with this. Maybe you shouldn't say it. Maybe Yankel doesn't want you to say it, right? Even a positive thing, even a true and positive thing is not necessarily the right thing to talk about. And that's Doiver emes bilvavai. There's a famous story, it's brought down in the Medrash, of Rav Safra. Rav Safra, and it's connected with this pasuk. Rav Safra was selling a donkey. He advertises around town that he has a donkey for sale, a chamer, the donkey for sale. And he has a potential buyer that comes to his field and is ready to buy this donkey. And this potential buyer comes to the field and sees Rav Safra and says, Rav Safra, I want to buy your donkey. How much do you want for it? I'm ready to pay 100, whatever it was, zuz. I'm ready to pay 100 for it. And Rav Safra was in the middle of Shema. He was in the middle of saying the Shema, and obviously in the middle of Shema, he can't answer. So he doesn't answer. He doesn't say anything. The person who came to buy the donkey thought that Rav Safra didn't like the offer of 100. So he says, okay, I'll pay you 150. Meanwhile, obviously, Rav Safra finished Shema, and he can answer the guy. And he says, I already accept, since I was in the middle of Shema, I couldn't answer you. But in my heart, I already accepted the 100. When I heard you saying that you're willing to pay 100, in my heart, I said, okay, fine, I'm going to sell them. Let me just finish the Shema. Now that I didn't finish Shema and you already offered 150, but in my heart, I accepted the 100, pay me 100. And that's what's brought down from this pasuk, Doiver emes bilvavai. What's the truth in your heart? What was the truth in your heart? The truth in your heart is that you're ready to sell it for 100 and the person offered you 100. You accepted that. Don't go back on that. That's not a menschliche thing to do. That's not a righteous thing to do. The righteous thing is that the person offered you 100 and you accepted in your heart, even though you couldn't tell him at the moment. Sell it for 100. And that's the story. That's the story that's brought down in the Medrash to explain this pasuk of Doiver emes bilvavai, that when you have a truth in your heart, that's the one that you should follow. It's also over here, the pasuk says three different things, and each one of these three things represent a different virtue of a person, a different category of virtue of a person. There is the idea of haylech tamim, someone that goes with simplicity. What's that? That's the type of avodah, of divine service between a person and Hashem. Who do we go tamim? Who do we go with simplicity? Who do we go innocently with? With Hashem. Others, we got to go with our eyes wide open. The real world, go with our eyes wide open. But when it comes to Hashem, we go tamim with tmimus. So it represents, the first category in this pasuk represents the relationship between man and God. The next one, poyel tzedek, this idea of action, and the action is, the action should be just, and the action should be, it should be righteous, doing the right thing. Where do we do the right thing? It's when we're dealing man to man, between man and his friend. That's where we are expected to act righteously, to act in a just manner. And Poyel Tzedek represents the idea of the mitzvahs, of the obligation of being just and righteous between you and your friend, your neighbor, your fellow, etc. And the third category, Da'iver emes b'lvavai, in your heart. Make sure you're saying the truth in your heart. What does that represent? Da'iver emes b'lvavai is that you gotta be in a good relationship with yourself, between man and himself. You also have to be proper. You have to treat yourself well. You have to honor yourself. You have to do things for yourself in a proper manner as well. Meaning there's mitzvahs that are between man and God. There are mitzvahs between man and man. And then there are things between you and yourself that you have to do in a proper manner when nobody's watching, when nobody's around. And it doesn't affect my neighbor. It doesn't affect anybody. Maybe it doesn't even affect God. We shouldn't say that because that's not true. Everything that we do affects God in one way or another. But the idea that it's not a mitzvah per se, even then, hold yourself back or pull yourself forward, doing a mitzvah or holding yourself back from doing something that's the opposite of a mitzvah. Okay, pasuk number 3. So leiragal al l'shayin is the first part of this pasuk number 3 is talking about not talking lashon hara, right? The idea of gossiping, not to gossip. The next part is not to do something that will negatively affect re'eyo, your friend. And then the third part of the pasuk talks about not being an embarrassment, not being a disgrace. Talking about the relatives. So interestingly, the Radak right away comes here and says the second and third thing in the pasuk. One talks about re'eyu, about your friend, and the other thing, the third one talks about your relative. Says it's not necessarily only talking about your friend or your colleague. Obviously, it's talking about anybody. But since the natural thing is that we deal with our colleagues and friends and business partners on a regular basis. So out of that kind of terminology comes out of that, but it's obviously talking about like that you don't do that negativity shouldn't come from you to your fellow, not only to your re'eyo, to your friend, but also to any of your fellow, any of your fellow man, that you should be careful. And also cherpa, the idea of disgrace, also not necessarily to your relative, but to everybody. But we're going to get into that third part of the pasuk in a moment because it needs much more explanation.
Isn't Re'ehu a neighbor?
Re'ehu means a friend.
A friend?
Like fellow, a friend. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Most translations use fellow, but it's a colleague, someone that you work with. It's someone that you deal with, someone you have dealings with. It could be your neighbor. It could be a business partner, etc. Interesting also that when it talks about gossiping, it says ragal al l'shaynai. Ragal means that it shouldn't become regular, that it shouldn't be something that you do out of rote. So you should train yourself. Just because you heard a good shtick lashon hara, just because you heard a good piece of news about somebody, not the first thing is, pull out your phone and say, who can I call? Who can I give this information to? Right? It shouldn't become a regular thing that it's similar that when you daven, it shouldn't become regular. Like it shouldn't be. It's from the same concept that it should be something. Yeah, it shouldn't be a habit. You should that talking about others and gossiping shouldn't become a habit. You shouldn't get used to it. And this is referring to gossiping, and the person shouldn't even gossip about himself. A person, let's say lashon hara about yourself. I get sometimes People make a mistake. They think that I take confessions. I'm a rabbi. I don't take confessions. But people sometimes think that I do. And I tell them, not only are you talking about the wrong religion, but not only that, you're not even allowed to say Lashon Hara about yourself. What are you calling me to tell me Lashon Hara about yourself? That you're not allowed to do. Now,
Maybe
obviously, if in a scenario where there's a case and you want advice and something happened and you're calling a good friend or you're calling a rabbi or you're calling someone that's in a position that could maybe help you, of course, say it from that perspective. But just think, I want to get it off of my chest and therefore I want to tell it to you. That's either another religion or it's pure Lashon Hara and you're not allowed to say it. So there's also Leiragal al Shayne. Should get regular just saying things. Oh, I did it like this. I did this. I did that. If it's Lashon Hara, don't say it. That's one thing. And the other thing is also, sometimes we mutter under our breath. You call someone a Rasha, Shoyim Arurim, or something. Like these different. You call someone a name, or while you're driving and someone cuts you off, and things that you would never say in front of your kids all of a sudden come flying out of your mouth, right? These kinds of things that don't teach yourself to say these things. That's Leiragal al Shayne. The pasuk is talking about what we should strive for. Who's going to live, as we say in the first pasuk, Niyagar ba'alecha, who's going to live with Hashem in his tent, who will dwell on the holy mountain. Who is it going to be? The person is going to train themselves not to say a bad word, not to say a bad something about somebody else, about yourself, even if there's nobody there to hear it. Don't get used to saying something negative. That's the idea of Leiragal al Shayne. Then the next part of the pasuk says, that you don't do anything to your fellow that will negatively affect this person. Now, this is a hard thing because if you have a business partner, inevitably something's going to happen over the years that even if you didn't have a negative intention, that something bad will happen to this person. So the Medrash talks about this, and our sages say that what we have to do is that we have to get used to doing things in a manner that we give in. If we teach ourselves to do these things in a manner of being mavater, of giving in, so then it doesn't have to go my way. Okay, you have an opinion, fine, let's do it this way. So when we do this, and we do this in such a way, so then when we give in, so that will teach us that, and it will help us that in the long term, in the long run, that we will we won't even inadvertently, we won't harm or do something that will eventually be a negative that will hurt our fellow. And that's the second part of the pasuk. The third part of the pasuk, so this is an interesting, the cherpa. Cherpa literally translates and disgrace, the cherpa. You ever got screamed at, a busha and a cherpa, right? Busha means an embarrassment, and a cherpa means a disgrace. So this is the Hebrew word, cherpa. It's a disgrace. So the cherpa and a disgrace, nasa, you didn't carry al kroivai on your relative. What does this mean? You didn't carry a cherpa, a disgrace, on your relative. So there's two ways to learn this. Rashi has his approach, others have a different approach. Rashi says, and this is pretty straightforward, that when you see a relative of yours that does a cherpa, that does something in disgrace, don't try to cover it up. And if you can help him. But don't say, let's make it if your uncle didn't do this disgrace. So don't cover up on behalf of your relative. Or if you're in a position to even stop it before, say, this person is going to do something and it's going to be a disgrace, let's try to help him before, that way it doesn't happen. There's others that say that it's talking about the person. Don't be a disgrace to your relatives, right? The problem with that explanation is that it's such an extreme. We're talking about someone that's being so careful, but he's saying the truth even in his heart, and he's not going to say Lashon Hara, etc., etc. How could he be a disgrace on his relatives? And that's why Rashi goes to the extra length to explain it otherwise. But both explanations work in the pasuk. That you shouldn't do anything that will disgrace your relatives. By the way, relatives means every Jew. Every Jew is a relative of yours, right? And don't be this disgrace to the Jewish people. And we're going to bring this up again at the end of the class about this disgrace to what it represents to be a disgrace to others. Pasuk number 4. So nivze bein of nimos, that when you see something, when a person sees something despicable, he despises it. He gets disgusted by it, right? That's and he honors Yirei Hashem, honors Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars, sages, and when he promises to do something, he fulfills that promise, even if it's something like the examples that are brought in Medrash and otherwise. If he promises off meat, or if he promises a certain amount of tzedakah, and all of a sudden he says, "Oh, 1 second, I promised too much. I said I won't eat meat for a year. I'm going to be a nazir or something, and it's too much, it's too long. Or I promised a certain amount of tzedakah, and I can't fulfill my obligation, etc." No, lo yamir. A person, this is the idea that a person doesn't go back on his word, that he makes sure to fulfill his word. Rashi, though, over here says that there's a reference over here of Nivze bein of nimos, that someone that's abhorrent to Hashem is also despicable to me. And Rashi brings up the story of Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu was a king, one of the kings by the Jewish people, and his father was a very not nice king, and did terrible things. And the way so since it was despicable to Hashem, it was also despicable to him. And there's a story for another time. But the way he dealt with his funeral, etc., partly in order to help his father's neshama go have some sort of punishment here in this world, that way he doesn't have to have such a serious punishment in the next world, but also because of nivze bein of nimos, because something that's despicable to Hashem is also something that I don't like. That's the basic idea over here, according to Rashi. The Radak over here comes and says that we're talking about an extremely humble person. But when you have a humble person, so you might come and say, is that humility? Or is that just someone that's not comfortable with themselves? You have different types of people. You have someone that you look at them and say, well, you can either call that person humble, or you could say that he's just uncomfortable in his own skin. And that's why when he comes into a room, he sits in the corner because he's uncomfortable, not because he's humble. So Radak comes and says that it's very specific over here, that it says Yirei Hashem Yechabed, that he honors those who follow in Hashem's ways. It honors Talmidei Chachamim, honors Torah scholars. What's the idea of honoring Torah scholars? Because if you honor Torah scholars, if you have it within you, not only to be humble and that you don't have to be the focus of the room when you walk into a room, but you also find it within you to honor Talmidei Chachamim, to honor those who have Yiras Hashem, those who have awe of Hashem. So that means that you have a healthy understanding of self. You have a healthy approach to yourself. You're just humble. And the fact that you're quiet, or that it is not because of a depression issue or anything else. The idea is that you are tamim, you are simple in the ways of Hashem, you're innocent walking in the ways of Hashem. And part of that is that I honor Talmidei Chachamim, and that I'll go out of my way to do. And that's the way that Radak says. That's why Yirei Hashem Yechabed, the honoring of Torah sages, is mentioned over here to bring out this idea of that, showing that the person is truly taka, a humble person. And that it's coming from a proper place. The humility is coming from a proper place. Also over here, to honor others, honoring others, Yirei Hashem Yechabed, honoring others, the main idea, and the sages talk about this, the main idea that it's trying to bring out about honoring others is to recognize, to be able to hear someone else's approach, to be able to hear someone else's idea, to be able to hear another opinion. And that's very, very important. Yirei Hashem Yechabed, that someone else is studying Torah with somebody, you're having a walk with somebody, and someone else has another approach, another opinion, another way to look at something, another way to say something. Listen to what they have to say. Yirei Hashem Yechabed. Obviously, if they're coming and saying total kfira, they want to try to convince you of something that goes against what Hashem's Torah, that's not what we're talking about. But Yirei Hashem, someone that has awe of Hashem, Yechabed, honor that person, that you're going to listen to what they have to say. The famous example is Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they would even mention the other one before they would mention their own opinion. They would say, "Oh, Beis Shammai says so, and we have another opinion, but we say that." honor the other person and their opinion, and that's the idea. That's what a Heilig Tamim, a Peil Tzedek, a righteous person. That's the proper approach, the way a person should approach these things. Pasuk number 5. So Kaspei Leinasen Beneshach. So first of all, he doesn't give money. He doesn't lend out money with ribis, with interest. So that's the first thing. And he doesn't take bribes. If you're going to do all these things, you'll never falter. So first of all, before we go forward, Rashi comes here right away and says, that he'll never falter. It doesn't mean he'll never falter. It says that he'll always get back up. That even if he falters, it will not be la'olam. It will not be forever. Someone could falter, but they'll always come back up. So that's the first thing that I wanted to mention, because it's important, the way to learn this pasuk. Those who do these, la'yimait, he will not falter, and if he will, it won't be la'olam, it won't be forever. That's the way Rashi learns.
He'll be resilient.
Yeah, he'll get through it, exactly. So, the question right away that's brought down in Me'am Lo is that we already said that this character, this guy, this righteous person, he doesn't do anything that will be negative for his friend, right? Like also doesn't do any bad, nothing that he does, meaning he's careful not to do anything that will negatively affect his fellow. Ribis, interest and taking bribes is is doing bad to his fellow. So he's basically repeating himself. Like, why does he have to mention this? So that's the first question that we're going to deal with. And so the answer that's given, meaning what's the chiddush? What's the uniqueness of this pasuk number 5? It's repeating something that we already mentioned. And the chiddush is, the answer that's given is that here we're talking about someone that wants to give money. He wants to borrow money and give interest. Even in such a case, don't accept ribis, don't accept interest, because the Eibishter said not to. And that's the uniqueness. That's why it's said so much times in the Torah about not taking interest, specifically because a person will beg you and say, please, I want to borrow with interest. That's what I want to do. Don't worry, I'll pay back with interest. And that's since it's a willing partner, the Torah says multiple times not to do it, and it's one of the most complicated areas in halacha when it comes to the idea of lending money with interest, when you're allowed, if you're not, and when you're not allowed, and how you're not allowed, and what's considered to be interest. There's so many things. Today you're talking about doing an early bird sign up. Someone that signs up for an event early and gets a discount. There's like a big question if that's considered to be interest. If you're paying out interest for someone that's signing up late. There's a conversation that today in modern responsa, in modern halachic discussions gets into. And a person wants to pay a bribe in order to win the court case. So it's a different category of doing something negative to somebody else, and that's why it's repeated again over here. It's interesting that a person, there's 3 things that a person will run after. A person runs after kavod, honor. A person runs after pleasure, and a person runs after wealth. Those are 3 things that people run after. Not necessarily in that order. It actually depends on your age. Depends on your age, right? At different times in life, we run after money. At different times of life, we run after pleasure. And at different times of life, we run after honor. It's a proven thing. Everybody does it in one way or another. And some people are more refined and they don't do it. And and it's interesting over here because the previous pasuk says, the previous pasuk talks about nivze bein of nimas and nishpa lahara v'lo yamir, right? That first of all, that you honor those who fear Hashem. So you're not running at that. It's not about my honor. It's about someone else's honor. And also when I want something and I realize that I promised it maybe to hektish, or I promised it to tzedakah or something like that, but I want it for my pleasure, but I don't back down. So that represents that idea. And then in the final pasuk, in pasuk Hey, talking about my money and my business and my financials, that I want to become wealthy. Do it in the proper way. Don't do it in the improper way. And that's the three different categories, three different things that a person runs after that's mentioned also in the Medrash. We learn from here, the sages learn from this pasuk that if someone that has money, and everybody's got money, some have more than others, but everybody has money. Someone that has money and does not loan it out with interest, meaning it's sitting by me and I'm not loaning it out with interest. Everybody has the opportunity in one way or another to loan it out with interest. And so every single moment that you're doing that, you're doing a mitzvah, the sages say. Why? Because it says very clearly, your money, you're not giving out with interest. Someone who does that in the same pasuk, someone does that, will never falter. So that in and of itself is already a mitzvah that by not doing the negative, by not lending it out with interest, you're already accomplishing a mitzvah. Now, the Medrash Tehillim. So first of all, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're talking about 11 things over here. There's 11 different character traits that we mention here in this chapter. And it's interesting because the Medrash Tehillim brings two different things. First of all, the Medrash says that each one of these character traits we can find by Hashem. And the Medrash goes into each one and brings a pasuk, brings a proof how this is the way Hashem is. Hashem wants you, Hashem wants you to go with simplicity, and Hashem wants you to go with sincerity, because Hashem does that. It says Atzur Tamim Paloi, that Hashem goes Tamim, right? And Payal Tzedek, also Hashem, because it says Ki Tzadik Hashem Tzedakos, etc., etc. And it goes through each one. I'm not going to go through each one and bring it down. It goes through each one and shows how each one of these character traits are us trying to mimic Hashem, so to speak. It's a fascinating thing. That what are we trying to do with these 11 character traits? We're trying to be more like the Eibishter. We're trying to be a little bit more godly, and that's the idea of who miyoger ba'alecha. Who's going to live with Hashem, so to speak? Who's going to dwell on his holy mountain? Someone who acts like him. And Hashem is all these things plus, but Hashem does all these things for us. And therefore, we try to copy, so to speak. We try to be a little bit more like Hashem. So that's the first thing the Medrash says. Then the Medrash comes and says that this also, each one of these character traits, each one of these 11 character traits, are also talking about different righteous people. Each one represents another righteous person throughout history, and in that order. And the Medrash continues and says, Hoylech Tamim, who's the one who went in simplicity with Hashem? Zavram, it's Avram, because it says, Hisalech lefanai v'yei tamim. There's a famous pasuk, walk in front of me and be tamim. Who's Payal Tzedek? Who does things right? Yitzchak. Yitzchak was brought for the Akedah. Hashem wanted it to be done. That's what was done. Now, who's Daiver Emes? Who's the one who represents Emes? Titain Emes Yaakov. Yaakov is the one who represents Emes. Why Yaakov Emes? Because all his children followed in his footsteps. That's the ultimate truth. That not only you do Emes, but everybody around you does Emes. That's the inspiration of truth, and that's what Yaakov represents. He represents Emes. He represents truth. Not to say something that you shouldn't say. Who's that? It's Binyamin. Binyamin knew about the sale of Yosef and kept quiet. He wasn't in on it. He wasn't a part of it. But he knew it wasn't the right thing to tell Yaakov, to tell his father. Kept quiet. That's not to do something negative to your fellow. It's Yosef. Yosef had the opportunity to do something to his brothers or to give it to them over the head, and he didn't. And that represents Yosef. When you see something that's going wrong, and it's going to be a disgrace, and it will be a disgrace for the Jewish people, you got to stand up and be counted. Ze Pinchas. This is Pinchas. We all have a moment that we could stand up and be that Pinchas, that we could stand up and do something to make sure that it's not a disgrace, that we help somebody, or we do the right thing in order not to be a disgrace for the Jewish people, or help somebody else not be a disgrace for the Jewish people. Nivza bein of nimos. So we translated it before that nivza bein of nimos is the idea that you're disgusted by things that are disgusted by Hashem. But here, nivza, he translates from the word biza. Biza is the spoils. What happened when the Jewish people were running after the spoils of Egypt by the splitting of the sea? What was Moshe Rabbeinu busy with? He was busy with Atzmis Yosef, with important things. Not with Bizas Hayam, not with the spoils by the sea. He was busy with Atzmis Yosef. So he was busy with more holier pursuits, more spiritual pursuits, meaning it's a euphemism for that, but he was busy with what really matters, with what really counts. Who honored Yirei Hashem, those who were in awe of Hashem, that is referring to David HaMelech. And Nishba Laharav Layamer, someone who made a promise and didn't go back from his promise, is Boaz in the story of Ruth, and not giving Kaspei Lenasim Beneshach. The Medrash continues, is talking about Evadia, about not giving money with interest, not lending out money with interest. It's talking about Evadia, that he saved a bunch of sages, prophets in a ma'ara, in a cave, and he fed them, etc. And he wouldn't take money with interest afterwards for it. And Sheikhad al Naki Leilakach, and not to take a bribe is referring to Shmuel. That's an interesting message that this is represent. Where does this come from? Why do we all of a sudden have these 11 things? These 11 things, on the one hand, represent the way Hashem is, and therefore we try to emulate Hashem. On the other hand, also it's representing different tzaddikim throughout the generations, that each thing, it was the core and the representation of a tzaddik, and it goes in order from our forefathers through a few generations. So that makes it a little bit more, brings it a little bit down. I wanted to end off with a story that's brought down in the Medrash. I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to end off with a story of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Gamliel. It's a fascinating story. It's not the first story that we have of Rabbi Akiva laughing that sages see something in a certain light, and it depresses them, it makes them sad, it makes them cry. And Rabbi Akiva sees things in a whole different manner. And that's the story that we have over here that's brought down in the Medrash. The story is that Rabbi Gamliel, whenever he used to read this kapitel Tehillim, he would weep. He cried like a baby. That's what it says. He Pashat sat there and cried. Rabbi Gamliel would cry with these verses. When he would say these verses, he would Pashat cry. Rabbi Akiva, when he would say these verses, he laughed. He was happy. He laughed. So Rabbi Gamliel looks at him and he tells him, so what's the story? Why when I look at these verses, I cry. Why do I cry? Because who's going to be able to do all these things? Who's going to be able to do? I want to be in Hashem's tent. I want to be, as the first pasuk says, Yagar ba'alecha, Yishkem b'harkochecha. I want to dwell on the holy mountain. After 120, I want my neshama to go to Gan Eden. I'd love for that to happen. But who would be able to accomplish all these things? These 11 things, they're such high things. How are we going to be able to accomplish it? And Rabbi Akiva is laughing. He says, why are you laughing? What did I get wrong over here? So he told him like this. There's a halacha. There's many halachas when it comes to shratzim. Shratzim are creepy crawlies. Creepy crawlies, bugs, are tummy. If you touch a bug, if you touch a tummy bug, you become tummy. And if you become tummy, you can't go into the Beis HaMikdash. There's different. You can't eat truma. There's a few things that you can't do, and that's why there's different levels of becoming impure. One of the things becoming impure is touching a sheretz, touching a creepy crawler, an insect, a bug, right? There's a level of becoming impure, being in the same room as a corpse, as a dead person, and that's why a kohen that tries very hard not to become Tameh, because if Mashiach comes today and the Beis HaMikdash is built, he wants to be able to be in the Beis HaMikdash and serve and bring karbanos, etc. He wants to be able to, and you can't go in if you're Tameh, if you're impure. So even today, a Kohen is careful not to become Tameh, to the extent that if you ever in a funeral home, you go to Paperman's, there's the Kohen box. Why is there the Kohen box? It's a separate building. There's windows that you could see into the chapel, but it's a separate building. In that building, you can't become Tameh because there's no corpse in that building. And you'll see that they're careful even not to go under the overhang. That way they're not considered to be in the same building, etc. And there's kind of them are careful. Some of them are more, some are careful not even to go into a hospital because of the morgue, etc. etc. That's all the idea of becoming Tameh. When you become Tameh, so yeah, there's a process to becoming tar, depending on the version of becoming tameh, depending on the version of becoming impure. There's different ways to become tar. It usually involves going to the mikveh, sometimes even to be spritched with the para aduma, with the with the ashes of the red heifer. But the Rebbe Kiva says like this: how many laws and how many details and how many insects are there that can make you tameh? Millions. You can become tameh in so many different ways. But if you get tameh with one, if you touch even a hair, like not a hair, but the size of a hair of something that makes you tameh, you're tameh as if you touched all of them. You're tameh by touching one insect, just the same much as touching a million insects. So he says, that's for the negative. That if you touch one insect, you become tameh as if you touched all of them. How much more so for the positive? That if you did one positive thing, it's as if you did all positive things. And that's why he was laughing. It says, Midah Taiva, that wouldn't it be the right thing to say that if you did one thing, it's considered as if you did all of them. And that's why I'm laughing. So Rabbi Gamliel looks at him, he says, Rabbi Kiva, Nichamtani, Rabbi Kiva, Nichamtani. Akiva, you have consoled me. Akiva, you have consoled me. And that is the idea of this chapter, that we might look at this chapter and say that it is such, I want to be a good person. I want to do the right thing. But if doing the right thing means that I have to do all of these things to the fullest extent, it's impossible. It's too much. Even the righteous people that we mentioned, each one of them, we refer to one in here. Avraham is connected with Hailech Tamim. We don't say Avraham was Hailech Tamim, Pa'il Tzedek, even though to a certain degree he was all of them, but there's one that was Avraham. And that's the idea over here, that it's not about all or nothing. Chas v'shalom. Judaism and Hashem is never about all or nothing. It's all about the journey. And Akiva teaches us, Rabbi Akiva teaches us over here, choose one of them, take one of them, make one of the things your thing. And by making one of the things your things, you're going to have it all. It's all going to be together. It's all going to be one. It's all, you're going to have access. You're going to have a connection to all of it. And that's the lesson that we should take from this kapitel, that we should focus on something, not be overwhelmed by it. Focus on one of the things, or two of the things, or some of the things, and make ourselves into a more of a mensch, into a better person. And that way we should be able to Yagar Ba'alecha, Yishkem Barakachecha, we should be able to live with in Hashem's tent and to dwell on the holy mountain.